Welcome to Formed, where each week we navigate a relevant topic or question through honest conversations. We are three pastors with three different backgrounds on staff together at Irving Bible Church in Irving, Texas. We believe we are constantly being formed in the way of Jesus for the sake of the world, and we hope this podcast helps with that. So let's jump into this week's episode of Formed. Welcome back to another week of Formed. We get to hang out. It's Tuesday.
Yes.
Tuesday. But they hear this on Thursday, right?
That's true. You're listening to this on Thursday, but behind the scenes, we record this on Tuesdays.
Big reveal.
Yeah.
Big
The
reveal.
magic of podcasting.
Today, we're going to talk about singleness. I came across this article back a few months ago. Well, not a few months ago. It was this month. It was in August on Relevant Magazine. And the title of the article was called "The Church Needs to Rethink Singleness." And just paraphrasing this article is written from this perspective of, man, like the church really we got to look at how we're portraying singleness, how we're approaching singleness, and the church as a whole, obviously is an opinion piece, but it's like it needs to rethink how we think about singleness. So when I say that, or when I say about the church and singleness, what do you guys think about?
Yeah, well, I think in many ways the church has bought into what our culture thinks about singleness. And so I think in Western culture, and often in, I'm Indian, and Indian culture is very much the same, marriage is held up in such high regard, which it should be. Paul talks about it as a gift, and yet it's the highest aim. That if you want to live a fulfilling, rich, complete life, you have to be married. And I don't think that's what the scriptures say, or Jesus says,
Absolutely.
or Paul talks about. And so, in many ways, the church has, I would say, devalued singles, or has valued marriage at the expense of singles. Let me say it like that.
And I think part of what happens is churches can be so driven by pragmatism and so oriented towards growth, right? We've lived through the last 2 or 3 decades in the church here in North America. It's all been about church growth. And oftentimes, pragmatically for churches, the engine of growth, getting new people in the door, is young families.
Sure.
And so much attention gets focused in the church, so much resources gets devoted in the church to young families, that it winds up, even if completely unintentional, it winds up communicating married life with kids is the ultimate sort of pinnacle of Christian experience. And it winds up, I think, sort of by accident, perhaps, communicating a devaluing of the single life. But that's actually precisely the opposite of what we see in the New Testament, where single life is dignified in a way that for that ancient culture was new and different, right? That for them, it was just assumed everyone was going to get married and have children. And when Jesus comes along and starts a movement as a single man, and one of the primary sort of advancers of that movement, the Apostle Paul, is a single man, and Paul will write about the dignity of the single life and this in some ways as a gift from God for participating in God's mission in the world. It's a revolutionary kind of way of viewing singleness, and we've reversed,
flipped it.
Gone back on that somehow.
And I think that that idea that marriage is the ultimate, that the greatest aim of your life, if you want a rich, full, happy life, is to be married, has led to. It's a lie, and has led to a lot of pain and confusion, both for marrieds and singles. That is so contrary to Scripture.
Speaking of Paul and Jesus, and you mentioning at the top that Jesus was a single man, what did Jesus say about singleness?
So I think before we talk about anything that Jesus said in particular, it's just worth noting that Jesus was a single man, and Jesus is fully human. Right? We sometimes just emphasize the full humanity of Jesus when we talk about the atonement. We needed a one who was both fully God and fully man to die for our sins, but when we talk about Jesus fully human, Jesus shows us what the fully human life looks like.
Yeah.
he lived a rich, full, abundant, fully human life that that we can look to. And so the fact that he himself was a single man tells us that you don't have to be married to live a full, abundant, thriving, flourishing human life. Now, I think before I say anything else about this topic, I just want to make a big caveat in this discussion. I think it's important for me to say it would be arrogant for me to assume that I know the experience of people who are living single life. And so I have now been married more in my life than I was single.
Yeah.
And yet as a pastor, this is something that is really important to me, really dear to me, because we follow a Savior, our teacher, our guide, who was himself a single man. And so before we talk about anything he said, I think just worth talking about the reality of his life.
Yeah. And I would just add that I think what that tells us about Jesus, like, it's important that Jesus is a single man, because what that tells us is that romantic relationships, sexual experience, marriage is not required to be a fully complete human. Because if we believe that to be true, then we're implying that Jesus wasn't
fully human.
Right. So I think that's really important to note.
We're talking about the culture a little bit ago. I go to like expectations of just this is what you do in the timeline,
Right.
And the expectations of people coming out of high school into college. And I heard something about this at about a local college. I won't say the college, but I guess I could, SMU. And how when some students will start there, how some of the parents will book out the chapel on campus for 4 years later, and just because it's so highly sought after,
Expectation.
yeah, and I'm like, that just sets this expectation, you have to find your person, in those 4 years. I'm like, man, that's such a pressure, and it goes against that. And I guess if you want to speak more on that, like, what is culture telling us about singleness?
Yeah, again, like we talk about, there's a devaluing of singles, and so if you're single, you lack intimacy. You're going to be lonely. You're second rate. It's that kind of thinking. I think what's interesting to note, just to kind of tag on to what you said, it's really interesting that something like that, booking out the chapel, happens in the South. That wouldn't happen in the North. And that's a lot around economic factors, because you can't just graduate college with a bachelor's and start a family. You're not going to be able to afford it. So, people go to grad school, and then the next step is, so it's just delayed a little, but it's still an expectation in our society that, I'm a 48-year-old single woman, and when people meet me, that's like one of the first things they want to talk about, because it's very rare to be a 48-year-old single. And so there's a sense of, what's wrong with you? There's something off. You're considered to be less than, and again, the scriptures don't talk about singles in that way.
What's some of the most awkward things people have said to you?
Well, they want to set me up with people all the time, and I'm pretty sure I don't want to be set up by the people that want to set me. There's people I want to set me up. I'm open to that, but it's not everybody.
Oh, that's good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to ask this question. Why should married people care about how singleness is viewed in the church?
Yeah. So I think in part, we just have to recognize that, again, getting back to the way that we so often sort of structure church life, we tend to structure church life around married people, around young families, and wind up not creating structures and environments that really do allow single people to thrive within Christian community. And so often, I think that causes single people to have to look for other places where they can find connection and belonging and a place to thrive. And so I think we have to think about, as married people, as a family like mine, how do we create space, invite people into our life together as a family, as well as our life together as a church? And I think through the years about some of the key people that have been a part of our lives that have at times felt like family, that they're really present and involved in what's going on, so that we can really create those structures. I think about, it's important when we're talking in biblical theology around all of this to go all the way back to the beginning, to this vision of human life that we have in Genesis, and where after God has created the man, he says it's not good for man to be alone. And in the Genesis story, everything God's made it is good, it is good, it is good, it is good, it is very good. And so we're to be shocked as readers when we come to this place that says it's not good. And what's not good? It's not good for the human to be alone. And so God makes the woman to come to be that aids, that strong helper, that fellow warrior who comes alongside, and they find that community together in marriage. But it's important to note that in that story, the point isn't that marriage is the ultimate form of community.
Yeah.
It is just to say that marriage is one form that community takes that allows a person to thrive without being alone, because God has made us for intimate connection one with another. And we need to make sure that we're structuring our churches, we're operating as families in ways that allow for, that really create an environment where single people can find that deep sense of connection and belonging. And I fear often, because of our sort of pragmatic orientation, we have often failed in that regard.
Yeah. I think Jesus comes on the scene, and he really gives us a new model for what it means when we talk about family.
Yes.
So there's this passage where his mothers and his brothers are looking for Jesus, and the crowd's sitting around him, and they say to him, "Your mother and your brothers are outside seeking you." And he answered them, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" And looking about at those who sat around him, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother." And so with Jesus, I mean, he's shifting the whole paradigm of what the family is. And he's saying, whoever does the will of God, if you follow me, if you put your trust in Jesus, then you become part of this spiritual family, this larger family that then even overshadows the biological family. And that's why I think singles and marrieds need each other. Singles need families, and married people and marrieds need singles, because we are the family of God together. And that we're such an individualistic culture that's lost on us, that kind of sense of community that the Bible talks about and that Jesus talks about. And another passage, even the other part I would say is that Jesus has a high view of marriage. When you look at the Gospels, he has a very high view of marriage, even compared to the culture that he lived in. And so he goes as far as to say, it isn't for everybody, right? That there are some for whom that is not the best path for them. And he commends singleness. He talks about eunuchs, that's singles, those are celibate, as that may be a path. And so while he has a high view of marriage, he also has a high view of singleness. As you pointed out, Jesus was a single man. It's helping people understand that marriage isn't the ultimate, and that singles have a place, and there's something that we together need one another to grow in our pursuit of Jesus.
The calling of singleness, is that accurate? And how does somebody know if they are called to singleness?
Well, Paul will talk about it as a gift. And I know that there are times where that concept, I think, for some single people can just be challenging to think this doesn't really feel much like a gift. But he talks about it in 1 Corinthians 7. And he says, "I wish that all of you were as I am." And I think he's referring to his own singleness in this place. "But each of you has your own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that. Now to the unmarried and to the widows, I say it is good for them to stay unmarried as I do. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion." But so he has this line here that talks about the gift of singleness and the gift of marriage. And I think when we ask about, well, how do I know if I have the gift? Well, I think the idea is if you're single, you have the gift.
Right.
If you're married, you have the gift. And that doesn't mean you're going to stay in that state forever. Those of us who are married, and what sometimes happens is those who are single wish they were married, and those who are married wish they were single, right? And sometimes the gift is hard to hold, and it doesn't mean you'll stay in that state forever. But it's important to think about that concept of gift, because I remember working through a sermon a number of years ago talking about this passage, and thinking about this gift that I got from my grandparents when I was a kid. I remember being so excited because my grandparents who lived out of state, they would send a Christmas gift every year. And so you'd have a box under the tree. You couldn't wait to see what it was from your, the grandparents far away. And so I ripped open this box and I pull out these 2 duck heads that are bookends.
Like Peeps.
No, they're not Peeps.
Like
We're
Peeps.
not.
There's no comparison to Peeps.
I thought, again, we might get to an episode without Isaac doing that. No, they're like these ceramic duck bookends. And I'm like
What is this?
15, 16 years old going, what on earth? Like, this is the gift that I didn't want.
Yeah.
But what's interesting over time is I'm now Dr. Jones, PhD, right? Like, my house, my office, my car are full of what?
Books.
Right? And so in some sense, it was the gift that I didn't want, but it was the gift that I didn't sort of know that I needed. And when Paul talks about this idea of gift, it's not a gift for oneself so much as the New Testament concept of a gift is for the sake of others, right? It is the gift that is given. And so part of what Paul is teaching in this passage is the idea that in this season of your life where you are single, whether that is a season that is for now or a season that is that in this season of your life, this allows you to be given in some unique ways for the glory of God. So he goes on later and he talks about this same kind of teaching. So further down in chapter 7, he's talking about part of the dynamic that a married person is preoccupied by the needs of their spouse in ways that the single person has a kind of freedom that the married person doesn't. And in verse 35, he says, I'm saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in the right way, in undivided devotion to the Lord. Right? And so the gift idea is that in this season of your life, you have this opportunity to live in undivided devotion to the Lord. And I think about, when I think about the Jesus movement, not only as we've talked about Jesus, John the Baptist, Paul, but you can go down through the centuries and you look at, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Mother Teresa, Eric Liddell, Amy Carmichael, and on and on and on. We could go through the list of people that God has used in profound ways. And I'm sitting on the sofa with one right here, right? Who God has used in profound ways in the season of singleness in their lives, living with that sense of undivided devotion to the Lord.
Yeah, that's good. Sam Albury has written this book it's a tiny book called 7 Myths of Singleness, and he's got this great line. He says, single people are unmarried, but we never think of married people as unsingle. Yeah, it's such a great line because what he's pointing at is the truth that singleness is often immediately at the foundation. The premise is that singleness is lacking and missing something, deficient in some way, and the only way to cope with it, to bear up under this burden, is to have some kind of superpower. So when people talk about this idea of, are you called to singleness, you must have some kind of superpower. Even the idea of gift has often been thought to be, you've been given this special ability to bear up under this burden. And to exactly what you said, Barry, like that's not what Paul's talking about. It's a gift, just like marriage is a gift, and the purpose of gifts, according to Scripture, is to build up the body. It's about serving others, and I think oftentimes we think about it as personal fulfillment and my own self of my own needs and things like that. And it's not to say that our needs aren't important. I don't think that's what Paul's pointing at. Keller says it like this in his book, The Meaning of Marriage. I thought this was a great quote. He says, the giftness of being single for Paul lay in the freedom it gave him to concentrate on ministry in ways that a married man could not. Paul may very well then have experienced what we today would call an emotional struggle with singleness. He might have wanted to be married. He not only found an ability to live a life of service to God and others in that situation, he discovered and capitalized on the unique features of the single life to minister with very great effectiveness. And I think that's so true because I'll tell you my own experience. Like my singleness has allowed me to do ministry in a way that I don't think I would have been able to do if I had a family. And it's not to say one is better than the other. It's just the stage of life, the season of life that I'm in. And I think the gift is the state that you're in, yes, whether that's married or single. Mm-hmm. And I think the invitation is to receive that gift and the grace of God in your life through that. And it's and the gift of singleness has really helped form and shape me in the way of Jesus, in the image of Jesus, in ways I'm not sure I would have learned patience and contentment in the same way that I am still currently learning as a single.
That's good.
Yeah, that's what you kind of went into my next question, because a little bit ago you're like, hey, I'm a 48, maybe you said 38-year-old single woman,
48,
and
yeah.
when we're talking about that gift, how have you personally navigated that gift? Have you viewed it as a gift? How have you maybe not viewed it as a gift at times?
Yeah, so I would be lying to you if I said I always viewed it as a gift. There have certainly been seasons in my life where I experienced discontent and even grief. So I never stepped out into life and thought, I'm going to be single. I've always thought I was going to be married and have a family, and that's just not what God has done in my life to date. And so, especially in my 20s and 30s, there was a lot of moments of discontent, of where I saw my friends getting married and having families, and Lord, why can't I have that? Why aren't you bringing that into my life? And then I think into my particularly early 40s, there was a definite season where there was grief because I realized I wasn't going to have biological children, and that was really, really hard. But they were moments where I get to even press deeper into my relationship with Jesus. And so how I think about it is not in the sense of calling, but in the sense of I want to follow Jesus faithfully in whatever season of life, whatever place of life I'm in. And today that's being a single woman. And that's the call of discipleship to Jesus that's on my life in this season, and I want to do that well. I don't always do that well, but I want to do that well. And what it's allowed for me to do is I think about my life, and this morning I was thinking about it just in preparation for what we're going to talk about, and I just started weeping in gratitude because I think about I lead a rich, full life. I love my life. It's not to say it's perfect, but I really love my life, and I just had such deep gratitude to how good and generous and kind God has been to me. Because, I think you said this earlier, Barry, I have this deep web of rich relationships, family and friends that really are the spiritual family. Some of them aren't related to me biologically, and yet I've got this deep community where I may not have biological children, and yet I know I'm a spiritual mother, that I have, I'm Auntie Sissy to so many kids from 5 to now some of them are in college, and I get to play this really special role in their life that I love, that I'm part of families, that I get to go to Christmas or birthdays or anniversaries or whatever it is, graduations, and it's not weird and it's not awkward. I'm just part of their family. And I love that. It's been so special to me. Now, I have to say, I've had to be intentional, maybe even more than my friends have had to be in really investing in those relationships. But that's been really meaningful to me as well. And to see how do I model that well for people? I want people to see that I really do have this rich life because my focus is on Jesus, right? My eternal relationship with Jesus outweighs all these other things. It doesn't mean I don't need human relationships, or whether that's a marriage or a friendship. It means that we fix our eyes on Jesus. And that's this just thing I'm chasing after. Like I said, I don't always feel like I do that well, but I want that. I want that to be true of my life. So it's not always easy, and yet I want to receive the gift that God has given me, and I want to experience the grace of God in my life. And I trust that He knows what I need more than I do.
You wept with gratitude when you looked at your house, and you're like, man, this is really clean. If there was a dude in here, this wouldn't be that clean.
Well, I've got this, so in our living room, I've got this, it's a whitish couch. It's not white. People say it's white. Anyway, every time married friends come over, that's the first thing they comment on, you and your white couch. Like, I was like, first of all, your house isn't messy because your kids, it's because of you. You know?
All right, he's going to be a smart aleck over here, but let me just pause and say thank you for that, Sissy.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Thanks.
It's really beautiful, and I think that's just a compelling vision for all of us. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Smart aleck. For those who are listening on audio, I turned my head to look at Isaac.
There's few moments that, you kind of get like lost in the conversation and the notes and everything. And I just found myself just like,
it's really good.
I don't even know what question's
really
next besides me trying to make a joke.
Yeah.
So
can I say one more thing? I also think like being part of this church has made me feel welcome as a single. Not even welcome, like I have a place. And a lot of that has to do, I never had a pastor who preached on singleness other than Barry, who talks about it as this is a gift and it's a beautiful thing. Just like we talk about marriage is a gift and it's a beautiful thing. One doesn't have to cancel out the other. And I think I appreciate you for the way you've led us in that way.
when we look at a couple like myths about singleness, why is I saw this and it was like, does committing to being single or calling to being single mean that you're committing to being lonely forever?
Yeah, so I would, I talked a little bit about it earlier. I would say no. There's a unique depth of intimacy that marrieds have that I don't experience because you're committing to life with one person, right? So there is certainly a unique depth of intimacy that marrieds have, but I think there's a breadth of intimacy that singles can have because you have greater freedom, greater flexibility to have a broader range of relationships. I think the other part that's really important to mention is that I think in our culture we have made intimacy and sex synonymous, and they're not. That romantic relationships and sexual experience are the context in which we believe intimacy takes place, and that's not how the Bible talks about it. That there's a depth of intimacy that can be found in friendships. True friendships can be, you can be vulnerable and you can be open, and they're not superficial or fleeting. And I think so often we've devalued friendship for the sake of marriage as well.
That's good.
There was this article on Lifeway Research back in 2019. It was 7 lies about singleness. And it says this in regards to sexuality. It says, one of the lies it listed is singleness is a waste of sexuality. If someone remains celibate their whole life, isn't that a waste of a human dimension of their humanity? Doesn't it neglect the fact that God made us as sexual beings? Why is that false?
Yeah, so once again, if we hold to the traditional Christian position with regard to Jesus, fully God and fully human, then we have to say Jesus, as a fully human, is a fully sexual being. God has made all of us sexual beings, but there's a whole lot more to being a sexual being than having sex. Yeah. And that's what happens is we wind up reducing our sexuality to sexual gratification, sexual pleasure, right? So Deb Hirsch distinguishes 3 aspects of our sexuality, what she calls gendered sexuality, which has to do with our embodiment as male or female, are what she calls social sexuality. That is that craving for intimacy, connection, belonging in social relationships, where all of those social relationships are experienced as I am a man in relationship to you, Sissy, as a woman. I am a man in relationship to you, Isaac, as a fellow man. But so there's that social aspect of our lives, and then what she calls genital sexuality. And so that is the desire for a sexual partner and sexual gratification, right? That's having sex. But what happens is we reduce the concept of sexuality down to that third component. Right. And without recognizing, Jesus was fully human, therefore fully a man, a fully sexual being, and he lived a full human life of flourishing, and he lived his sexuality with wholeness and holiness as a single man, showing that it is entirely possible to live as a fully sexual human being with wholeness and holiness in celibacy.
Yeah. What would you say to the person listening to this that is single, but they're like, man, I don't want to be single?
Yeah. I think the first thing I'd say is God has not forgotten you. He has not abandoned you. He has not forsaken you, that God is doing something in you. And to pay attention, to try to pay attention to what God is doing. And then, like we said before, Paul talks about singleness as a gift. That's a gift gifts are to serve others and to build up the body. So how can you use your singleness as a way to serve others and to build up the body? The gift isn't some kind of ability. It's the state that we're in. And so we receive that and we try to experience the grace of God, and that God has grace for us in whatever season that is. So receive it as a gift. And then third, to acknowledge that singleness is hard, that we would be foolish to say, like, it's great and it's wonderful. No, there are places where it's hard because we are wired for connection and for relationship. And so that's where singles obviously struggle. So how do you be intentional? Sometimes as the single, you have to be more intentional than your married friend to develop those deep, rich relationships. I think for me, my safety net has been this network of deep relationships that I have with people it's just been really meaningful and beautiful to me. I don't know what I would do without that. So really investing in those relationships, because we were not meant to be alone. And then thirdly, I said it before, I think it's fix your eyes on Jesus, that this eternal relationship with Jesus far outweighs everything else. Doesn't mean we don't need human relationships, but fix your eyes on Jesus because he has so much more for us. I really believe, like, God has used my singleness. This is part of Jesus' call of discipleship on my life, that there is a cost to our discipleship, and yet there is goodness and beauty. And, Jesus, when he talks to his disciples, Peter says, we've left everything to follow you, Jesus. And Jesus says, for those of you that have left fields and brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers and children, you're going to receive 100 times in this life and then in the age to come. That even today, God has something for us. It's not just for eternity, because a lot of times I think we send that message to singles. Well, you may be discontent now, but God is, wait till eternity. But today, God has something for you.
So good.
So those are a couple things.
Yeah. And I would just say a hearty amen to everything you said. And I think then there's one other thing that I want to add as a pastor on behalf of the church, and that is just to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the ways the church has failed you, for the ways the church has potentially hurt you, for the ways in which the church has perpetuated misunderstanding, myths, lies. And I know that is a very real experience for many single people in the church, and really hard. And I just want you to hear from me as a pastor, I'm sorry.
That's good. Thanks.
Thank you for the conversation. Yeah. Thank you to Sissy. Thanks for being vulnerable and opening up part of your life for us and for everybody listening. So
that's good.
There's no easy transition to our fun banter.
Our banter.
Our banter at the end, that is, we have some fun with to round out each week on the podcast. This week, the assignment was, what's the worst date you've ever been on? Worst date. Who wants to go first?
You go.
Well, okay. Well, so, it's been a long time now since I dated anybody other than my wife. Right. So I was, reaching back in my memory bank, and I couldn't really recall any, particularly horrific experiences from back in the day. But I actually did think about one date that Kim and I have had in the not so distant past that was really challenging, but then also like really great. And so we went out of town a couple of years back to celebrate an anniversary. We went down to the Hill Country and just outside of Austin. And so one of our dates was we went to this winery, and we sat out on this beautiful patio out on the back. And I've told this story in some context, but I guess maybe not the podcast. So we're sitting out on this patio, and we have a bottle of wine, and we're there for like 3 or 4 hours. And My dear sweet wife is an Enneagram 4. She can experience the full gamut of human emotion in a very short period of time. And so in this conversation, she's experiencing all this emotion. And so there are points along the way where I'm just like sinking down into my chair because she's just as mad as she could possibly be. And then there's times where we're just belly laughing together. And then like at one point, she's just, broken down in tears. And it turns out to be this, by the end of it, really deep sense of connection we have. But there were points along the way where I wasn't sure how this whole thing was going to go. And but the thing I love about the story is at one point, the woman who was the waitress came out to check on us, and I just watched her out of the corner of my eye. She walks out onto the patio and sees the tears streaming down Kim's face, and she just immediately turns right around and goes back inside. And so a few minutes later, we go inside the building and realize the lights are off. And there's this one little room with a table, and the whole waitstaff is sitting at the table sharing a bottle of wine. They had closed she had come out to tell us that they were closing, and she saw Kim crying. She's like, I'm not getting in the middle of that. And so she turned back around and went inside and waited on us. And so the whole place had closed down, but we were having all of our feels. So as I said, there were points along the way where I thought this is not going well.
Yeah.
But it actually turned out to be this deep sense of connection that we enjoyed because for us to be together in all of those feels, right? In the belly laughter and the we need to work through this because I'm upset, angry, and the tender moments of tears together turned out to be a really special memory. Even though at points along the way I thought this is not going well. This is not going well.
Mine is this is not my worst. I'm not sure I could always talk about my worst on the podcast, but the second one I think of, I've had some really good dates, but the second one I could think of is I was set up with this guy, and he was just brilliant, just like he was so smart and so established in his career and all of this. It was like something that was it was like kind of like molecular biology or something that he had a PhD in. And so we go on this date, and I couldn't understand anything he was saying because he'd use these really big words. Like I felt like I needed to pull out like Google Translate or something. And I feel like I'm fairly intelligent, but
he was trying to impress you.
I could not. Do you like talk like this normally? And so I'm sitting there. It's first date. This is what I do. I'm like thinking in my head, like, what if I marry this guy? Like, is this every conversation we're going to have? Like, I can't do it. So it's an hour and a half of just me. I don't think I talked because I didn't understand what he was saying. And he did all the talking, and that was the end of the date. I didn't see him again. And I think he thought it was a great date. So
you ghosted him after that.
No, I told him. Oh no, I might. No, I told him. I told him. I didn't ghost him. I told him.
I say, what if he's like listening to this podcast?
Just don't think this is gonna work out, kind of thing.
Okay, I have two real quick. I was trying to think of.
You have two worst dates?
Yeah, I do. Two since we've been married, and one. Do you want to hear about Amy Grant or a massage, or spark notes of both?
Yeah, I think we want both.
Okay. I don't think we could put those two out there and not tell both.
Amy Grant and massage, like.
Well, the Amy Grant one was we wanted to do something for Christmas and have like a Christmas date, and she was having like a Christmas special type thing. So we spent a little money, went to this thing. I'll just say she's past her peak.
Uh-oh.
All right.
Uh-oh. We're going to get some emails about this one.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Amy Grant is past her prime. All right. And so anyway, but halfway through, we're like, we didn't say anything, but we were both feeling, and finally I just broke and I was like, did she just sound off to you? And Barb's like, yes, I've been thinking it the whole time. So it's like, we laugh about it because we're like, hey, we spent that money on this, and it was like not great. Second, couples massage. I'm just not here for massages, all right? There's no conversation. And it's like, why are you putting rocks on me? I don't want rocks on me. And it's not enjoyable for me. And
like
Barb
that.
loved it. She's sitting there. I'm like trying to look at her, and she's just like eyes closed. I'm like, are you asleep? Did we just pay for you to sleep? And she just loves it. And that's what she texted me back. She's like, hey, what about a couples massage that you still joke about to this day that you're like, didn't do anything for you. So
Nope.
I love it.
I don't need rocks on my back.
You don't need rocks on your
good.
back.
I'm good.
No, you don't want to see people's feet.
The amount of people I've had weirdly come up to me over the past week and is like, hey, you don't like toes. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
well, we're concerned about your
no,
issues.
but like, it'd be kind of weird if I said I like flip flops.
Show me your toes.
Yeah, it's like weird. Anyway, all right. Well, thanks for the conversation.
Good.
We'll be back next week on another week of Formed.